This is the second of two videos on LDAP and Active Directory. In this video, we cover how AuthPoint integrates with an LDAP domain and how we can import users from LDAP and Active Directory into AuthPoint. We will also cover how to manage LDAP users in AuthPoint, and at the end of the video, we will look at how to troubleshoot LDAP when it is not working. Let's get started. AuthPoint can communicate with any LDAP environment and import users from the LDAP database back into AuthPoint. This lets us associate an AuthPoint token with the LDAP users in order to protect them with multi-factor authentication. AuthPoint only imports information about the users. It does not store the LDAP passwords. LDAP credentials are always sent to the LDAP domain for validation through an AuthPoint gateway. Since LDAP packets can contain sensitive information like passwords, when communicating with LDAP, you should always use LDAP-S to ensure the data is encrypted in transit. When we deploy AuthPoint into a production environment using LDAP and Active Directory, we need to think about high availability. In order to authenticate LDAP users, a gateway and domain controller must both be reachable or authentication will fail. To ensure this always works, we recommend that you deploy at least 2 gateways into your network and configure at least 2 domain controllers that AuthPoint can use. AuthPoint supports 1 primary gateway and up to 5 secondary gateways for any single LDAP environment. In this diagram, we can see the LDAP authentication flow with AuthPoint. Step 0 represents the initial configuration where we import users from LDAP or Active Directory into AuthPoint. In Step 1, AuthPoint processes an LDAP user logon. This authentication could come from any source, such as the IDP portal, a Radius client, or a SAML application such as Office 365. AuthPoint checks the user's second factor first if required, and then in steps 2 and 3, user credentials are sent to the LDAP domain for validation via the AuthPoint gateway. We recommend that you deploy all gateways and domain controllers to the same location and not use VPNs in order to reduce latency for authentications. If the primary gateway were to go down, then one of the secondary gateways will take over processing user authentications. However, secondary gateways are not used to sync new users from AuthPoint. Now let's take a look at how to configure AuthPoint in order to import some LDAP users. Here we are in the WatchGuard Cloud dashboard. I'll start by going up to Configure at the top, then AuthPoint. Then I'll go over to External Identities on the left. We can't just create LDAP users in AuthPoint. We need to set up the integration between AuthPoint and an external LDAP server to allow AuthPoint to import LDAP users. To do this, we add an external identity. I'll select the LDAP external identity and click Add. In the last video, we looked at an Active Directory server and covered how to find this information, and I've entered the information for my domain here. I'm using the wgtrain.com domain, and we can see how the search base is written: dc equals wgtrain, comma, dc equals com. I created a new system account for AuthPoint to use in Active Directory, but I did not create the account in the default users container, so I enabled this toggle and pasted the distinguished name of my system account in here. If we scroll down, we can see I've entered the domain name wgtrain.com, and next are the LDAP attributes. For Active Directory, we can usually use the default attributes here, which map each attribute inside Active Directory to a specific user field in AuthPoint. Double check that the correct attributes you want to import into AuthPoint are defined here. If you are not using Active Directory, you can select Others and fill out the attributes for your specific LDAP environment. Finally, we can see I've added the connection information for 2 domain controllers in my network for redundancy, and I've left LDAP-S enabled. We always recommend using LDAP-S when possible. I navigated to gateways on the left, and we can see that I have both a primary and secondary gateway in place, ensuring I have full redundancy. I'll edit these gateways, and under External Identity, I'll add my configured LDAP external identity, then click Save, and this will configure the gateways to connect to the domain. We can only add our LDAP external identity to a single primary gateway. Refer to our Using the AuthPoint Gateway video for more information on creating or installing the gateway. Now that I have a connection between AuthPoint and my domain, I can begin to import my users. On the External Identities page, I'll open the options for my external identity on the right. There are 2 ways that we can import users into AuthPoint: a group sync or an advanced query. We recommend using the group sync because it is easier. For more information about advanced queries, see the AuthPoint documentation in our online help center. I will select Group Sync, and you can see I have one group sync configured already. I will add a second one to import some additional users. When we add a new group sync, AuthPoint asks the domain for a list of security groups. Once the options appear, we can select which groups to import from LDAP and the AuthPoint group the users will be added to. I'll sync the LDAP group marketing. We can also enable Create New Synchronized Groups, which adds the selected LDAP groups into the AuthPoint account. Once LDAP groups are synchronized, you can begin to use them within AuthPoint authentication policies to manage access for the LDAP users. For more information about groups and authentication policies, refer to the Using AuthPoint Authentication Policies video. Once our group sync or advanced query is configured, AuthPoint will automatically sync with the domain and import any new users. We can also select Start Synchronization under our external identity options in order to manually sync any changes if we'd like. In order for users to sync successfully, they must have all 3 required attributes: first name, username, and email address. The username and email must also be unique in your AuthPoint account. See, a few new LDAP users have been synced into our account. AuthPoint displays LDAP next to the display name to indicate that this is a user that was synced from an external source. The users will be sent a token activation email when they are synced, so make sure the user's mailbox is ready to receive email before AuthPoint syncs them. Once their token is activated, these users will be all set to start using any of the configured AuthPoint resources to have their login protected with MFA. If we don't want an LDAP user in our AuthPoint account, we don't have an option to delete them. So how do we remove them? Well, in AuthPoint, LDAP users must first be quarantined before they can be deleted. In order to quarantine a user, AuthPoint must not see that user when the sync runs. One way to do this is by removing the user from the LDAP security group that is syncing them into AuthPoint. I removed some of the users from their LDAP group, and after removing them in LDAP, we can manually sync our external identity and the users will enter the quarantine state. While in this state, the users are disabled and cannot authenticate, but we are holding onto the user's tokens, so if the users are synced again in the future, the users can continue to use the existing token in their mobile app. Users can also be quarantined if the group sync is deleted or if their user is moved in the LDAP database. While quarantined, we have the option to delete the user, and we can also click the funnel at the top to filter for all quarantined users. Then we can select them all and mass delete them if required. Under the Settings menu on the left, there are some additional options for how quarantined users are handled. We can configure AuthPoint to automatically delete quarantined users after a set amount of time or immediately. So what do we do when this doesn't work? Well, the first thing we want to do is make sure that we have a good connection to the LDAP domain. On the External Identities page, I can open the options for my domain on the right and choose Check Connection to see if the gateways can talk to the domain controllers. The result will be displayed at the bottom. If this is not working, it means a configuration error in AuthPoint, the gateway is not responding, or the gateway cannot reach the domain controllers over the local network. We can investigate LDAP issues further if there's problems by taking a look at the gateway's LDAP logs, which are found at C, Program Data, WatchGuard, AuthPoint, and then Logs. In these logs, we can see that when I ran the connectivity test, the domain controller rejected either the distinguished name or passphrase of my system account. We will also see information in the LDAP gateway logs related to the user syncs and user authentications. Let's say we ran the group sync, but not all of our users showed up. The result of any LDAP sync will appear in the audit logs, and we can see here a log for user not created. If I click the log, we can take a closer look, and in this case we can see a couple examples. Syncing one user here would have exceeded the licenses on the AuthPoint account, and in another case we see that the user's email attribute in LDAP is blank. Because email is a required attribute, we must fill this out in LDAP first before the user can be synced into AuthPoint. The audit logs will also contain information about failed LDAP user logons with additional details about what went wrong. If you are auditing logins in your domain, there may be additional information in the security event logs with the ID 4624 and 4625, among others. These event logs can show the result of LDAP authentication requests, which may help you understand why a failure occurred. That will do it for integrating AuthPoint with LDAP. In this video, we covered how AuthPoint connects to LDAP and why we want to use high availability. We demonstrated how to add your LDAP external identity, how to import and manage LDAP users, and how to troubleshoot LDAP using the audit logs, gateway logs, and event logs.